In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy and the climactic losses suffered by the Raven Guard, at Isstvan V, the Legion emerged, fractured, their numbers decimated, and the bloodline on the brink of functional collapse. During the second founding, when the surviving Loyalist Space Marine chapters were restructured into smaller, more manageable chapters in order to prevent any recurrence of a rebellion to the scale that had occurred with the Heresy, the Raven Guard found themselves particularly in a diminished state. For solar decades, the Raven Guard would labor under the shadow of its own past, recruiting new members and rebuilding from a near zero. This was a slow and painstaking process that shaped the former Legion, now Chapter's character. With insufficient manpower, limited heavy equipment, and a profound lack of armored support, the Raven Guard were forced to perfect the art of covert and guerrilla operations. Their tactics would now be forced to emphasize mobility, stealth, and precision strikes over brute force, relying on small, capable, independently operating units, capable of exploiting terrain and the element of surprise, along with intelligence-gathering superiority. Even in the far-flung 41st millennium, the chapter reflects these conditions, as predators, land raiders, and even the latest patterns of heavy power armor are rarely seen amongst their ranks, mostly relying on the tried and true methods of warfare that led them through the heresy. Following the defeat of Horus, Primarch Corvus Corax accepted the second founding with no small amount of relief. Though divided, he recognized that Reboot Guilliman's vision for a far more resilient Imperium was a necessary sacrifice over the overwhelming power and the ability to expand that the old version of the Imperium carried with it. Yet for Corax, this was a feature he intended to face alone. Consumed by guilt over the loss of two Loyalist brothers and the damage the Raptor Project had caused to his Legion, along with the measures undertaken by him to save the lives of his gene sons, he withdrew into an extreme seclusion within the Ravenspire upon deliverance. There, he personally granted the Emperor's peace to every surviving mutant produced by the Legion's accelerated gene seed program, regardless of how loyal they were. This he saw as a somber and necessary act, despite it being wholly unprecedented within the chapters. For one Terran year, Corax would remain in complete and total isolation, his anguish constantly unmitigated. However, eventually he would depart the Ravenspire, boarding a transport destined for the Eye of Terror, leaving behind a single word: nevermore. His ultimate fate remains largely unknown, a mystery that has lingered over the Raven Guard for centuries, shaping their ethos and haunting the memory of every leader, down to Kayvon Shrike. Centuries after his disappearance, the chapter would face another challenge: the deterioration of the Raven Guard's gene seed. Some historiators and gene adepts suggest that this is a consequence of the chapter's early accelerated development program prior to even that of the heresy, which placed an unprecedented strain upon the genetic templates of the Legion. Several organs unique to Space Marines no longer functioned as designed within the Raven Guard, and repeated attempts to compensate or to repair the damage has failed. Even amongst the Primarchs, this seems to be somewhat of an issue. The Raven Guard have been forced to increasingly rely on untouched gene stocks tithed and stored on Terra by the Adeptus Mechanicus during the early days of the second founding. This scarcity of valuable gene seed has necessitated extreme selectivity within their recruitment. Initiates spend a significantly longer amount of time within the 10th Company, training as scouts or Vanguard Marines for far longer than, any other chapter, ensuring that each new battle brother is as genetically stable and tactically capable as possible. Consequently, the Raven Guard rarely, if ever, engage in operations without a support cadre of aspirants, whose presence is designed to bolster the strategic depths and operational flexibility of the chapter as a whole, while giving further experience to said aspirants. Despite these constraints, the Raven Guard have refused to compromise their offensive tempo. Even when under strength, they continue to strike at the Imperium's foes, sometimes sustaining grievous casualties in campaigns that test the limits of their endurance and push their diminished numbers to the edge. While their preferred tactics are subtle and indirect, They are not adverse to fatal, full frontal assaults, employing every available ounce of Astartes' might at their disposal. Yet above all, the Raven Guard value tactical acumen, initiative, and precision over sheer numbers or brute strength. One of the more significant incidents that happened long after the heresy would occur on 508 M40, almost a century after their initial sightings of a rather notorious warband of Eldar pirates. The Raven Guards finally located their elusive quarry within the deeply frozen voids of the Sabaran Rift. They were well aware that any hint of an attack would send the raiders vanishing into the depths of the warp, which led the Raven Guard to deploy Strike Force Ultra, a strike team designed to be capable of overwhelming precision and swift exterminations, specifically trained to deal with such a raiding party. This group would be led by Captain Odysseus, who would exploit the cover of a drifting asteroid to bring the full might of his force undetected into the very heart of the Eldar's stronghold. And when the Raven Guard's Terminators stormed the base, the Eldar were caught utterly unprepared. The icy tunnels of this rift soon ran red with the vile blood of Xenos, leaving no survivor to tell the tale of this ambush. The next incident of galactic note that the Raven Guard took part in at a significant scale would be the Zephyr campaign, which occurred in 204 M41, 3 centuries after the Orc War led by warlord Arbuts the Incredible. This Wa had overrun almost the entirety of the Zephyr subsector and had encroached upon nearby Imperial frontiers. This led to the Imperium launching a long overdue crusade to reclaim any lost territory and push back the Marauders. This campaign was spearheaded by, ironically enough, the Marauders, the Eagle Warriors, the Relievers, and Raven Guard chapters, all supported by over more than 24 Imperial Guard regiments. This crusade sought to reclaim worlds forcibly abandoned to the feral orcs. After 2 grueling decades of campaign, the Zephyr subsector was declared purged of all Xenos corruption by 224 M41. The campaign extended further still into uncontrolled regions of space, where no Imperial hand had yet reached. One such planet was Bran, a savage death world of forests, steep plains, and jagged mountains, which was assigned to the 127th Death Corps of Krieg Regiment under General Himond von Paulus, and while clearing the open steppes proved rather manageable for the Death Corps, the forest remained dense and chock full of feral orc tribes who were particularly resistant to eradication. Von Paulus opted for containment rather than extermination at this point in time, constructing a network of fortresses that confined the orcs, which over time would evolve into Baran's first proper cities. These settlements gave rise to new Imperial Guard regiments, known as the Baran Siege Masters, whose expertise in siegecraft reflected the constant assaults they endured from the orcs. The Raven Guard established fortress monasteries on Kron, one of Bran's moons, in order to maintain a constant vigil over the world, stationing over 100 fully formed battle brothers who were tasked with constantly hunting the remnants of the orc warbands, not only on this world but on others. In particular, those who had stolen bits and pieces of Imperial technology during Arbuts' initial WOG. For generations, the chapter's detachment has balanced vigilance with selective engagements, cultivating potential aspirants from Baran's harsh and battle-hardened inhabitants. Then would come the Baran campaign itself, as decades after this, the Eldar of Beltan arrived on Bran, only to discover that the original Exodite colony who had lived here had been completely and utterly eradicated by the orcs, and later the remains of their civilization by the humans. Exarch Marion, the Fire Dragon, led an Eldar campaign of vengeance against the remaining feral orcs, driving them from the ancient forested sites. This displacement forced the orcs into conflicts with the human defenders, whose fortress cities came under relentless assault due to the now formed imbalance. Governor Asbara, now unable to deploy sufficient reinforcements in 224 M41, called upon the Raven Guard stationed on Kron. Shadow Captain Mordius, having assessed the situation, determined that conventional engagements would be insufficient, as he now would have to prioritize discovering the force behind the orcs' sudden withdrawal rather than confronting the nomadic greenskins directly. The Raven Guard advanced into the depths of Bran's forest, finding orc settlements completely destroyed, a devastation so advanced that it was not likely caused by inter-orc rivalry, meaning that something had disturbed the delicate balance of the world. Tracking the orcs across the Varan Voltus plains, the Raven Guard finally encountered the nomadic greenskins directly, but Mortis refrained from a direct engagement, instead shadowing the tribes in order to gather some form of intelligence. Days later, the scouts reported that the orcs were under assault. The Raven Guard rushed aboard 6 specially crafted Thunderhawk gunships designed to maximize stealth, only to find the orcs utterly annihilated. Their quarry then revealed itself, the Eldar of Baal 10, having orchestrated a planet-wide extermination, which would now start to target the human population. Mortis ordered an immediate strike, catching the Eldar off guard and inflicting severe casualties, including the destruction of uncountable scores of Eldar spirit stones. For hours, the Raven Guard engaged in a running battle across the plains, gradually overwhelming their foes through coordinated flanking attacks and numerical advantage. Yet the Eldar had anticipated such a move. As the Space Marines closed in on the remaining Eldar forces, webway gates erupted around a circle of standing stones, ancient monuments dating back to the Eldar's dominion over Bran. Through these gates, Eldar Swordwind reinforcements came, as veritable titans of war would now encircle the Raven Guard. Despite fierce resistance, this chapter's detachment was completely annihilated. Their last stand was brief yet heroic, and Bran was now reclaimed by the Eldar. However, the Raven Guard chapter proper has now vowed to retake the world and eliminate all Eldar responsible for such a loss, retaking Bran in their honor and punishing Baal-Tan for the atrocity they committed. Up next would be the downfall of Megararchy, occurring in 748 M41, when the High World of Thruskus publicly renounced the Imperial Creed. Due to the planet's ruling council, the Megarchy, a conclave of elders renowned for their eloquence and charisma, having held a strange, near-religious devotion to another ideal, were met with the deeds of the Raven Guard, who struck them down with a speed and precision which they were renowned for, executing the Megarchs atop their own spires, leading them like Christmas tree toppers. And as the Emperor's angels had struck down heretics, Thruskus was returned to religious obedience once more. Following this would come the Sabbat World Crusades and the liberation of Caligula, occurring in 750 M41 during the wider Sabbat World's Crusades, where the Raven Guard participated in a crucial landing on the chaos-held capital city of Nero, alongside Imperial Guard troops from the Latari Gundogs. They breached the upper levels and penetrated deep within the enemy's lines, inside the very Administratum Tower. Their swift intervention culminated in the unceremonious defeat of Demon Prince Voldorus, ending his reign of terror and restoring imperial control of the world. Combined efforts of the Raven Guard and their White Scars allies allowed the world to be freed of chaos corruption faster than expected, almost as if the Space Marine legions were designed from an onset to work together. Up next would be the hunt for Voldorus, occurring between 855 and 865 M41. When the White Scars' great Khan Kubliad vowed vengeance against Krenex Voldorus, a demon prince who was now leading a splinter of the Alpha Legion and terrorizing much of the galaxy. Over a decade, the 51st master of the hunt, Khosrau Khan, tracked Voldorus across Zoran, Karel, and Modana, yet the demon prince repeatedly eluded capture. Eventually, their pursuit brought them to Quintus, a desolate southern rock which was once a bulwark against the orcs, now infiltrated and veritably infested by Alpha Legion forces posing as loyalist military units. Stealthily, Khosrau and his company deployed from an orbiting strike cruisers via Thunderhawk, moving through the planetary defenses to land in the blasted canyons of the southwest capital. There, unexpectedly, they encountered Captain Kayvon Shrike and the Raven Guard's third company. Years of strained relations between the White Scars and the Raven Guard gave way once more to necessity, and the two chapters combined their strengths. At dawn, Shrike led a strike against the orbital defense batteries west of Mancraft, holding it against overwhelming Alpha Legion reinforcements. While the Raven Guard fought steadily upon the ground, the White Scars launched a hidden assault from the southern caves, striking with overwhelming speed. The Baneblade Iron Soul, the last remaining war machine of the traitors, would eventually be destroyed, breaking the backbone of Valorius's forces. Within the city, the Raven Guard deployed across rooftops, while the White Scars tore through the streets on their bikes, striking the Alpha Legion from multiple angles. Eventually, only Voldrus and his bodyguards remained, cornered beneath the Cathedral of the Emperor's Wisdom. Despite the Demon Prince's formidable power, he was subdued as Shrike pinned him, while Cosero severed his head, ending the threat and allowing the world to be secured by a regiment of Talran Desert Raiders only a month after the last of the Alpha Legion's deaths, marking the official reconciliation between the Raven Guard and the White Scars, despite them being forced to work on campaigns prior. The next event of note might not be as groundbreaking, however, it occurred in 890 M41 when the Raven Guard faced the Word Bearers under Dark Apostle Erilik, who was attempting to resupply the Fortress of Damnation. The Word Bearers were caught off guard by Raven Guard scouts. Trapped and outgunned, the Chaos Forces would quickly be overwhelmed and obliterated under continuous concentrated fire from Stormraven gunships, unable to escape in the merciless crossfire between the Stormravens and the Raven Guard scouts. Then would come the battle for Targaryen 8, when Shadow Captain Shrike and a detachment of infiltrators found themselves stranded behind Orc lines when their Thunderhawk was destroyed. For over 2 years, the team waged a guerrilla war, sabotaging Orc infrastructure, stealing munitions, and relaying intelligence to Imperial forces. Their actions accelerated the campaign's conclusion by decades, if not more so, earning Shrike the revered Imperial laurels, a testament to his enduring impact on the Imperium as a whole. Then would come the battle for Empoleon II. On the world of Empoleon II, the Raven Guard faced an Iron Warrior's fortress whose defenses appeared nigh insurmountable. Victory was only possible through the timely intervention of the Brazen Minotaurs, who sacrificed an entire company in order to divert the enemy. This allowed the Raven Guard's 4th Company to infiltrate their fortress, executing a precision decapitating strike, which destroyed the stronghold from within. Later still in M41 would come the mission to Kashrakt. During a prolonged conflict in the Sagaran Reach, the Brazen Minotaur's chief librarian, Felson, fell into the hands of the Imperium's Blight, a corrupted Space Marine warband, and was transported to the mortuary world of Kalshut for interrogation and likely either destruction or forced conversion into a follower of one of the 4 Chaos Gods. A small force of Brazen Minotaurs mounted a desperate rescue mission, but this mission's success was far from guaranteed. However, timely intervention would come from the Raven Guard strike team led by Shadow Captain Corion, who deployed covertly to the planet's surface ahead of the Minotaur's arrival. With precision decapitating strikes, the Raven Guard cleared corridors and secured an approach, enabling the Brazen Minotaurs to use their greater numbers and brute force to extract their librarian. However, it must be noted that while both chapters sustained casualties, the mission was ultimately completed, forging a lasting link of honor between the two chapters. Then would come the battle for Train's World, as the Imperium Blight tightened its grip on Fortain's World, a critical fortress whose orbit threatened to spill into neighboring sectors, including the Kandor system. This was done through corruption rather than martial conquest, or even a display of spiritual conquest. This had allowed Nurgle's followers to seize the bastion, leading to the deployment of both the 3rd and the 5th companies of the Brazen Minotaurs, who would lay siege to this fortress, determined to prevent a galactic-scale contamination of a Nurglite blight. Yet the traitors unleashed relentless hordes of corrupted and tainted Imperial Guardsmen in order to delay the Loyalists, exploiting every weakness to stall their assault. This stalemate was then broken when the Raven Guard's 4th Company, under Captain Chiron, was deployed, as 3 strike squads were launched into the planet, and despite heavy losses, the Raven Guard were able to penetrate the fortress's interior, clearing corridors and opening a way for orbital bombardment, ensuring the devastation annihilated all Chaos forces while the Brazen Minotaurs held off the main force, saving the colonists of Condor and turning the tide of battle. The coordination between the Raven Guard's infiltration and the Brazen Minotaur's siegecraft seems to be almost inbuilt by the Emperor's very design. Different legions who specialized in particular aspects of war, supporting each other with their own expertise. Then in 992 M41, the planet Nimbosa, which was on the volatile eastern fringe, became a recruiting ground during the Nimbrosa Crusade, and it was a land contested by both the Imperium and the Tau for decades. Multiple chapters, including the Imperial Fists, the Black Templars, and the Ultramarines, had attempted to assert final control of the world, with the planet reportedly constantly changing hands. Within this protracted struggle, the Raven Guard's 3rd Company, commanded by Kayvan Shrike, launched a decisive assault on the Tau's entrenched positions, compelling the Xenos to withdraw. And while the current status of Nimbrosa remains uncertain, operational highlights from the Raven Guard show that they could be overwhelmed, in particular with rapid surgical strikes against heavily fortified positions. Then would come an incident of a slightly more grandiose note. In 995 M41, on Lurid 9, the Watercast ambassador, Pormain Aureus, had seduced the local populace towards allegiance to the Tau Empire through a series of cunning, orchestrated, underhanded speeches. Guarded continuously by the Firecast Hunter Cadre, who were aided by Aircast pilots, the ambassador presented a formidable challenge. The Raven Guard, numbering barely in a dozen warriors, were tasked with eliminating him. Kayvan Shrike orchestrated a masterful strike, utilizing a singular Stormwing squadron, bobbing, weaving, and barrel rolling the gunships through miles of graffiti-strewn underways, emerging from darkened coverlets less than a mile from the ambassador. The Raven Guard struck quickly and struck true. Mayrin Ores was slain mid-speech by the raw, overwhelming firepower from multiple missiles, bolters, and grenades breaching his shield generators. Attempts at retaliation by 3 squads of XV-8 crisis battlesuits were intercepted mid-air by Shrike and his jump pack Vanguard veterans, who descended with lightning claws flashing, cutting down the Tau's forces in a brutal engagement. This victory was both dramatic and swift, and all the while being broadcast inadvertently by the same pitch-fed servitors intended to amplify the ambassador's influence, returning Lurid 9 to Imperial control within hours. This operation not only showcased the tactical brilliance of Kayvan Shrike, but also the Raven Guard's ability to use precision strikes, psychological impact, and battlefield manipulation in order to countermand the Tau's strange ability to seduce humanity. Then would come the raid on Crystal Nervrum between the years 992 and 996 M41. The Crystal Nervrum sector became a focal point of devastation when Wog Grahok swept through the area in 952 M41, transforming the sector capital and the surrounding worlds into a sprawling industrial base for Orc war machinery. By 988 M41, the Orc horde struck at Fasar, the sector's primary world, consolidating their hold and threatening Imperial control over the region. In 992 M41, the Raven Guard deployed to assist the beleaguered Imperial defenders, launching surgical strikes against the Orcs' production centers. Commanded by Shadow Captain Corvidae, the task force included elements from the 1st, 5th, and 8th companies alongside with a detachment from the 10th Company. The 10th Company alone contributed 7 full scout squads, representing a substantial portion of the chapter's recruitment pool. The raid had two principal objectives: the elimination of Big Mech Buzzgob, the Wog Chief's Megpoi, and the destruction of the sector's fuel depots and the refinery complex as a whole. Captain Erideth led a deep strike assault upon the refinery itself, encountering only light resistance as melta charges were deployed, obliterating the complex entirely and crippling the Orcs' production capabilities. Extraction by Thunderhawk swiftly followed, but the mission was now far from over. Intelligence reported a massive Orc column advancing on the Elysian positions. The 181st Elysian drop troops were tasked with destroying a partially completed Gargant, but they were ill-prepared to resist such overwhelming odds. Corvidae immediately launched a counterassault, engaging Goth clan Orcs as quickly as he could. The Raven Guard's intervention stalled the Orcs, allowing the Elysians to regroup and evacuate. Yet their reprieve was brief, if anything at all. The Orcs returned with Stompas, Death Dreads, Killicans, Mega Dreads. Corvidae's Land Raider Prometheus was quickly destroyed, though the Shadow Captain survived, dragging himself from the wreckage so he could continue to fight. With losses mounting and the tides of battle turning decisively against them, Corvidae ordered a full withdrawal. Thunderhawks braved the Orc fire in order to extract the embattled forces. The cost was severe, as over 70 Raven Guard battle brothers perished upon the field, and of the 2,400 Elysian drop troops, fewer than 400 survived, and more than 130 aircraft were abandoned to the Orcs. Despite these sacrifices, the Orcs' advance could not be fully halted. By 996 M41, the sector's capital, Forsar, fell, leaving Deliverance, the Raven Guard's homeworld, directly threatened. In response, the chapter's Master of Shadows recalled all forces to the Ravenspire, and Shadow Captain Corvidae was subsequently assigned to serve for 2 years in the Death Watch as penance for the operation's outcome. Then would come the 13th Black Crusade and the reclamation of Cathor. In 999 M41, during the 13th Black Crusade, the Imperial Shrine World of Cathor fell to the forces of the Curse of Unbelief, an affront that demanded immediate attention. The Raven Guard 5th Company, under Captain Corvain Valar and Cordicier Zrain Kale, deployed aboard the strike cruiser known as Second Shadow, linking up with a vanguard of reclamation forces about to assault the capital. Calthor had originally been brought into Imperial compliance during the Great Crusade, and its loss represented not only a strategic setback, but a symbolic insult to the Raven Guard. The very battle for the planet was ferocious. All 50 members of the 5th Company were present, including Captain Corvain and Zeral Kale. Unfortunately, they would eventually be presumed as lost, seeing as the Second Shadow was destroyed in orbit. Yet the operation inflicted severe damages to the forces of Chaos. Typhus, Herald of Nurgle, suffered severe damage to his battleship, the legendary Terminus Est, and more than 100 original Death Guard Plague Marines and a venerated Chaos Dreadnought were all destroyed. The 88th Cadian Shock Troopers regiments coordinated with the Raven Guard in order to achieve such miraculous results. And while the long-term strategic effect of this battle remains uncertain, in particular with regards to the 13th Black Crusade, the operation demonstrated the Raven Guard's ability to bite their thumb at their enemy, inflicting maximum losses despite being on the back foot. Then, in 999 M41, the legendary Battle for Ultramar would occur. The defense of Ultramar during the final stages of the 41st millennium represent one of the most desperate and internecine campaigns faced by the Imperium in recent memory. Though the Ultramarines were unquestionably at the forefront of this defense against the forces of the arch-enemy, they were far from alone. Amongst their most critical reinforcements was Shadow Captain Aetion Shan, leading a full squad of the Raven Guard's most elite warriors, dispatched with the singular objective of recovering the renegade Captain Ardiak Vans. Operating alongside the Ultramarines' 4th Company, Captain Shan's forces demonstrated a tactical brilliance while under fire that impressed even the leadership of the renowned Ultramarines. Their most remarkable action was the destruction of the Black Basilica, a colossal mobile fortress and demon shrine of the arch-enemy, capable of annihilating entire Imperial formations with munitions and war engines. Shan and his warriors infiltrated deep behind enemy lines, bypassing the extensive siege fortifications and scaling the sides of this very fortress. Inside, they planted demolition charges in the primary munitions magazine of the Basilica before attempting extraction. With no viable escape route, the charges themselves would be detonated within the Basilica, obliterating the structure in its entirety, shattering the enemy's offensive capabilities, and creating a critical distraction that allowed the rest of the Imperial forces to regroup. Following this act, the Raven Guard joined Captain Ventress and a specialized strike force deep within the core of Calth. Within this ancient, long-forgotten shrine, the combined forces of the Ultramarines and the Raven Guard faced the Blade Dancers of Zemogia and the Iron Warriors under the command of the legendary Warsmith Hansu, whose machinations had orchestrated this entire invasion. Every member of Shan's contingent, 10 warriors in total, fell during this ferocious fighting. Despite this, the mission succeeded, if anything, largely due to the Ultramarines being so heavily aided by the Raven Guard, leading to the Chaos plot being thwarted, and Ardrek Venas redeeming himself through valorous melee combat. Captain Shan would continue operations alongside the Ultramarines during a jump pack drop on Talsar, aiding Chapter Master Marnius Calgar and participating in the decisive defeat of Demon Lord Makar, the Thrice Born. Following the campaign, Shan attended to the solemn funerals for the Ultramarines and Raven Guard who fell in the defense of Ultramar, overseeing the recovery of the Gene Seed, including that of Brands, for return to the Raven Guard. In a rather unusual turn of events, during the Era Indominus, former Shadow Captain and Chapter Master Kayvon Shrike decided that his role as Chapter Master needed to be passed down, primarily due to Shrike believing himself unsuccessful due to the necessity of the fragmentation of the chapter's strength under his guidance. So, only recently has he elevated Aton Shan to the position of Chapter Master, a man who is said to be able to reach any prey no matter how secure it is, a man whose own methodology of war much more closely follows that of the Raven Guard's Primarch. This has led to Kayvon Shrike being one of the few Chapter Masters ever to rejoin as a Shadow Captain. However, it must be noted that Shan has decided to give a significantly higher amount of autonomy to Shadow Captains, trusting them to wage campaigns of misdirection, assassination, subterfuge, and terror in order to leave the enemies of the Raven Guard off balance and prime for destruction by the main body of the chapter. He has also dedicated the Raven Guard into forming new and more vigorous networks of spies, information thralls, and other agents in order to keep appraised of the ongoings within the Imperium. This elevation to Chapter Master only came as Kayvon Shrike had ordered the scattering of the chapter's primary strike forces, and it was due to Shan's ability and mastership of all three paths of the shadow that he was elevated to such a role. Despite some initial friction within the chapter, Shan has proven himself more than well suited for the role of Chapter Master, as he has allowed Shrike to return to the Greater Crusades, in particular, allowing Shrike to join the Indominus Crusade. Unlike Shrike, Shan is more of a backline leader, as he now only rarely commits his blade to herald the doom for the enemy, arriving only at the culmination of his battle brother's clandestine efforts, descending to land the final killing blow on an already weakened foe, keeping enemy forces from being able to gather too much information on his leadership, allowing the Raven Guard to maintain the element of surprise and misdirection at all times. The campaigns of the Raven Guard in this new era Indomitus, after the reinforcements from the Primarchs Space Marine, have revealed a chapter that has been honed by constant warfare and become masterfully disciplined in strategy and making the most out of the fewest amount of forces expended, embodying the very principles of their old chapter's founding. When shadows fall across a galaxy, it is in their concealment that the Emperor's will is most powerfully executed.